we are going to have his lecture, unfortunately over Zoom. I hope it is as good as live. A brief introduction about him. He graduated from the Otago University Medical School, Dunedin, New Zealand, and completed physician training before specializing in rheumatology. He has undertaken research fellowship at the Walter and Eliza Hall at the Melbourne, Australia, Yale University Medical School, USA, and the National Heart and Lung Institute, UK. He works as consultant rheumatologist at the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Disease, Bath. He is professor of pharmacoepidemiology. The research group led by Professor McHugh in the Department of Pharmacy and Pharmacology acts as a specialist serology lab for the measurement of disease-specific autoantibodies important in the diagnosis and clinical phenotyping of both juvenile and adult inflammatory myositis. Some of these diagnostic markers can only be detected reliably by a technique of immunoprecipitation, which is the gold standard for detection of autoantibodies, and therefore Neil McHugh lab is unique in this. To my knowledge, the only other lab in USA is Ira Tarzoff lab in Oklahoma. The McHugh lab is one of the very few places worldwide where we have experience and expertise to measure the entire range of these autoantibodies, which is why it acts as a central autoantibody center for UK and European myositis consortia, and currently houses a biobank over 5,000 sera of myositis patients. So he does have extensive experience, and well, many of you would have read his review article in Nature Review Rheumatology, which is very comprehensive. So here is over to Neil McHugh for his lecture. We're still trying to connect. Okay.
Okay, I think I'm live. This is rather nervous for me, not having used this technology before, but good morning, everyone. Perhaps someone could write just to make sure that my talk is started.
You want to feedback with it?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, my apologies for not being there at the meeting. You may have heard, but I had a disastrous time at Heathrow on the tarmac for 8 hours and then being offloaded. I apologise for that. Secondly, can I say I'm very pleased to be able to participate in your meeting, and I think I congratulate you on forming such an important consortium for myositis in India, which I think is going to be a great benefit for both research in myositis, but probably more importantly for patient care. So I have been asked to talk on the subject of autoantibodies in the diagnosis of myositis, and I'm going to give an overview and perhaps show some cases as well. Okay, so probably one of the most exciting developments in myositis, certainly over the last decade or a half, is the discovery of new autoantibody specificities in myositis, some of which are very specific for the condition, a couple of which, in fact, our own group have reported on, anti-ZO and anti-SAE. And these autoantibodies are now being spilled over into clinical practice as people realise how important they are as tools for diagnosis and also giving insight into pathogenesis. And just to demonstrate here that before 2005, in juvenile dermatomyositis, only 15% of cases would have a recognised autoantibody, whereas now, these days, over 70% of patients with JDM have a recognisable autoantibody. And the same is true, though not to the same extent, in adult myositis, where up to only 35% of cases of adult myositis, an autoantibody is not currently recognised. So indeed, the majority of cases of both juvenile and adult myositis, now a myositis-related autoantibody can be identified. And this is just a summary slide of the myositis-specific autoantibodies, some of which you'll recognise down the left column, and also the so-called myositis-associated autoantibodies that are no less important, but also identify patients who may have other coexisting connective tissue disease. On the next two slides, I've listed the autoantibodies in the left column. The autoantigen, the molecular targets for these autoantibodies, what is known about the function of the autoantigen, the autoantigens play an important role in cellular processes, and then a summary of the clinical phenotype. And I'll come back to this. But the discovery of the autoantigens is giving insight into pathogenic mechanisms. For instance, and a good example is HMGCR, which is a pivotal enzyme on the cholesterol pathway. And it is perhaps no surprise that this antibody is found in patients who are taking statins, the very drug which acts to inhibit the autoantigen HMGCR in lowering cholesterol levels. And this is the second list of these autoantigens, and again, they play important roles. And for instance, MDA5 is an important protein in the innate immune system in terms of viral RNA recognition. And we know that myositis, there is some evidence that myositis may be triggered by viral infections. And there is a strong interferon signature, no less so in patients with anti-MDA5 antibodies. So this is a summary slide that I want you all to commit to memory, which really summarizes the antibodies clustering with different syndromes. You will be aware of the anti-synthetase syndrome. Lung disease is prominent in that particular condition. Also, antibodies to MDA5 associated with rapidly progressive lung disease. Whereas skin disease, you have a different collection of autoantigens, anti-SAE, MI2, NXP2, TIF1 gamma. Whereas on the other hand, those patients with polymyositis, on the left-hand side here, two important autoantibody specificities associated with so-called immune-mediated necrotizing myopathy, anti-SRP and anti-HNGCR. And not to forget IBM, where now autoantibodies are becoming more prominent, and CN1A, for instance, and I'm sure there may be other specificities that we will discover. And also the autoantibodies associated with connective tissue disease overlap, shown here as well. Very recently, we completed a study published on the first 1,600 or so patients from a European cohort, and we studied their autoantibody profile. And this is listed here as a rather complex slide, but I think it shows quite nicely some important points. The smaller bubbles here are the myositis-specific autoantibodies and the different percentages in this cohort. And you will see that they very rarely overlap, and that they're very specific for myositis. So emphasizing their important connection to the underlying condition. We found that anti-TIF1 gamma and anti-MI2 had an increased risk of cancer. The one with cancer with anti-TIF1 is quite, it's been found many times now. And there have been reports of anti-MI2, but we also found it in this cohort. Anti-SRP was associated with carditis, and not surprisingly, interstitial lung disease, strongly associated with anti-synthetase syndrome, MDA5, and actually anti-UNRP. And then the myositis-associated antibodies, strongly associated with patients who had overlap connective tissue disease. So, as you know, dermatomyositis is a heterogeneous condition, and the antibodies, myositis-specific antibodies, in fact the term may be a misnomer, because these myositis-specific autoantibodies are sometimes, some of the specificities are more strongly associated with other manifestations of myositis, and not necessarily muscle disease, associated, for instance, with a skin disorder, or strongly with interstitial lung disease, even in the absence of muscle inflammation. And so knowledge of an autoantibody profile gives you information in terms of what clinical phenotype you may expect. And I'm going to show you some examples. This is a case of a lady, a middle-aged lady, who presented with increased breathlessness, developed later muscle weakness, Raynaud's, joint pains, and some puffy fingers with fissuring. She had an ANA that was weakly positive, high levels of CK, and non-specific interstitial pneumonia on CT scan. And that if I was with you, I would get you to raise your hands in terms of what autoantibody you may suspect in this scenario. So I'm going to give a minute for for a consensus in the room, and then perhaps someone would kindly type in what you think the autoantibody may be in this particular case. I hope this works, but I'm going to go silent for at least a few seconds. Aha, very, very good. Anti-Jo1. In fact, it wasn't anti-Jo1, it was this rather rarer one, anti-Zo, which we didn't know at the time, but characterized as antibody to phenylalanine tRNA synthetase. So it's a rarer anti-synthetase antibody, but as you will see, it identified exactly the same syndrome as the more common anti-Jo1. And you'll be aware of the anti-synthetase syndrome, the clinical features listed here, of which Jo1 is the prototype autoantibody, but don't forget the other slightly rarer anti-synthetase antibodies that make up a significant proportion of patients with this particular syndrome. We use a technique to identify these antibodies of protein immunoprecipitation, shown on the gel on the right bottom corner of the slide, which very nicely can pick up all these autoantibodies. And in fact, we use it as a discovery platform for other autoantibodies as well. And notice that these patients may be reported to be ANA negative, but muscle biopsy testing. And I think my last slide, I think I have to refer to a paper from Hector, in which he is the last author, to make my case. And this was, they looked at the performance of the classification criteria in a cohort of UK cases, and conclusions were that a non-diagnostic muscle biopsy reduced the sensitivity of the criteria. There is potential for sampling error in biopsies when either areas of affected muscle are inadvertently missed, or the sample was obtained at a time when certain features may not be present. So there I rest my case, and I see on this slide, in this study, that Professor Chinoy agrees with me completely. Thank you.
What do you have to say to that? So I think Professor McHugh has somewhat outed me that in the literature I seem to be on his side somewhat. But I would still argue that in cases of diagnostic doubts, and I would deliberately put forward 3 extreme cases here where there was real doubt, and the Netherline is obviously a complete googling of a case where they could have been misdiagnosed as having overlap disease. But I would argue that in the clear-cut cases, it's fine. And in Professor McHugh's conflicted opinion about antibodies, he is of course correct that if you have a reliable antibody, then we don't need to worry about performing a biopsy. But this is everyday practice. We're not talking about research papers. We're talking about a situation where you've got a patient with a racy case and weakness, you don't have a positive antibody, you don't have CTD features to go on. We're not neurologists, we don't have the encyclopedic knowledge of knowing about other causes of myopathies. So naturally, within our knowledge zone, we will then proceed to a biopsy. And I think when you're asking the correct question of your histopathologist, they can only help. So I think there is still the counter-argument for doing a biopsy even in 2019.
Thank you. Difficult to do questions and answers. Can we have the voting step? Because questions you might ask Hector, but what about really? It will be very slow, They are seeing the progress, it will take much more time. So perhaps the best will be, how many of you, by show of hands, how many of you are willing to say bye-bye to muscle biopsy? And the other way around?
Will you inform him of the results?
Still, people want to ask
No,
questions?
will you inform him the results?
Yeah.
Let him have the
There are
final
some
say.
hands raised, Okay, please, go ahead.
Sir, I would like to know that what is the minimal stain that we should request for a muscle biopsy, that we cannot miss these rare disorders, because we are a resource poor country. We don't even know where we all get all these detailed 14 stains are there for muscle biopsy, but at your place, which
Yeah, I'm very happy to share with you the stains that we normally do at Salford Royal. And actually, we don't routinely do a dysferlin stain, a dystrophin panel. We would only proceed to do that if we had a diagnostic suspicion. And also to emphasise that it's a fresh muscle biopsy specimen that has to be sent to the lab. If you fix it in formalin, it's impossible to do immunohistochemistry. You can only do H&E. So I'm not going to list them all, but I can certainly send on to you what should be done. But the CD4, CD8, CD68, MHC class 1, max staining, COX, bare minimum. Yeah.
Thank you, Hector. Are there any? Yeah.
Hector, would you consider doing an ultrasound-guided muscle biopsy?
Yeah, so I should have mentioned that, and I think in the future this is going to be the way forward, especially with rheumatologists being increasingly trained in the use of ultrasound. It can only help to reduce the complication rate when we're doing a biopsy, and also help us to unlock other biopsy sites which we would otherwise ask the radiologist to perform. So, I would only do a vastus lateralis and tibialis anterior blind, but if I had ultrasound capability, I would be, in principle, happy to do, for example, gastroc, deltoids, trapezii, paraspinal, etc.
I have one more question to Dr. McHugh, please. Why do certain antibodies behave differently, the same antibody behave differently in pediatrics and adults?
Also, there is geographical locations.
Can you repeat it?
The same antibody, if present in a child, has a different presentation. If present in an adult, has a different presentation. Like NXP2.
That's it. It's on mute.
His mic is closed.
Okay, sorry, I think I should be live. That is a very good question in terms of whether the antibodies identify different phenotypes. Sorry, I think I should be live. That is a very good question in terms of sorry, repeat. Antibodies identify different phenotypes. There's my iPhone coming in. And to take the example, anti-NXP2, I think the phenotypes are not too different between adults and children in terms of calcinosis, especially. I think the most glaring example may be anti-TIF1 gamma, which in children doesn't appear to be associated with cancer, whereas in adults, anti-TIF1 gamma is. This is very much an age-related phenomenon. And it may well be, and we're very interested in studying this, there may be different epitopes on the TIF1 gamma, different genetic associations. And in fact, from work we have done, it does appear the genetics, the HLA associations with TIF1 gamma may be different in children than in adults. Of course, the other possibility is that children who may have had some sort of oncological event that one's not aware of, that generates the antibody and the disease, and they're really, their immune surveillance is working much better than in adults who don't recover from that oncogenic event and go on and develop cancer. But I think across the board, the prevalences are different in children and adults. The clinical phenotypes are similar. There's some things such as cancer. Certainly, it's a very intriguing question.
Okay, then we close this session and we break for lunch.